Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. We're going to give people a few more moments to trickle their way into the session, so feel free to get yourself settled, grab a coffee, and we'll just leave it for a few more minutes before we get the session started. Okay, seeing that people have started to make their way into the session and the room is starting to fill up, allow me to introduce myself. So my name is Taryn Sebula, and I'm a Senior Manager of Member Engagement here at the Toronto Region Board of Trade. Today we have a very exciting workshop planned for you all. In this morning's session, hosted by our valued members, Board International, we will share with you a model built with a focus on achieving maturity in the financial planning and analysis process. During this morning's workshop, you'll learn how the maturity level within each category will help you understand and create an intelligent transformation strategy, how to optimize your available resources, including people, process, and technology, and where your FP&A team ranks in its confidence index, and how you can develop and implement an effective business planning process. So just a quick note, some of you may have noticed that there was a speaker change. Unfortunately, Jeff Miller was unable to join us. However, we are in excellent hands as Michael Leese, head of pre-sales at Board, has stepped in to manage and host the session for us. So it's bound to be an insightful and interesting hour. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that Toronto is home to diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. Though you could be watching from anywhere, the board's offices are located on the traditional territory of many Indigenous nations. And with that, I'll now pass the mic over to Michael to get us started.
All right. Thank you, Taryn. Just give me a second to share my screen and we'll go ahead and get started. And just Taryn, you just tell me when you can see my screen and you can still hear me loud and clear. There we go.
We're great on our side, Michael. Take it away.
All right, perfect. Well, good morning, good afternoon, everybody. As Taryn mentioned, my name is Mike Leese. I am the head of pre-sales here for Board Americas, subsidiary of Board International. Today's presentation really is a stepwise approach towards intelligent planning for financial planning and analysis, or the short acronym, as you can see, FP&A, as we all know it. So before we get started, let me just give you a brief introduction of who I am, and then we'll go through today's presentation, and we'll leave at the end time for some questions, as well as some responses for myself. If there's anything I can't answer, I'll be happy to take it away and get you an answer to follow up. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. So quick snapshot or quick bio of who I am. So as you can see, my name is Michael Leese. I sometimes go by Mike, so either or. I do answer to almost anything. So I am a CPA MBA, and I tend to joke that my CPA for many of those years that I sat in the Office of Finance stood for copy, paste, and attach, if you've never heard the joke before. So I've spent a little over 30 years of, you name it, anywhere from financial management experience to accounting to business planning, financial systems. And lastly, I've spent probably the last 12, 13 years pretty much on the sales side from a pre-sales perspective. I think it's the best job nobody ever told me about. So if I had the opportunity to go back, I would have started that pre-sales experience much, much sooner. But as you can see, right, I've done a lot of things in a lot of different organizations over the course of time. I have been primarily focused on the EPM world. I did take a little short venture outside and determined quickly and easily that, yep, stay back in where the accountants and finance folks are. So I spent a little over 20 plus years working in the Office of Finance in various roles, anywhere from a controller to the head of FP&A for local companies as well as global organizations. And as you can see at the bottom, I've worked for a few different industries, anywhere from mining to manufacturing to utilities. Sometimes that's an exercise in futility, probably the second joke I'll tell you, to distribution, to financial, and as well as professional services. So that's just a short bio of who I am, what I've done, where I've been. Just keep in mind, I am an accountant first and foremost, but I am not an IT guy by any stretch of the imagination. So anything I typically talk about is the ability to point and click, drag and drop. I'm never going to ask you to write code or learn code in any solutions I've ever worked with or sold to. Again, accountant first and foremost. Code in my world typically meant it hurts my head. And I'm not here to do that. Right? I fully understand everybody has a full-time job, and really I'm just trying to show you I think the wisdom of what FP&A is and where it needs to go future. So let's go ahead and get started. So the FP&A board maturity model, again, there was a research or survey done that talked to folks all over, well, in this case, probably close to about 1,000 different organizations. It was developed by tons of different practitioners within the FP&A space. So if you sat in the Office of Finance, it's anywhere from the accountants that close the books to the folks that pretty much do all those internal models to build those budgets, those forecasts, and do a variety of reporting of slice and dice the information to get answers in the right hands of the folks so they can make those all important decisions to drive companies forward. But there are 6 categories we're going to focus in that we've gleaned from all the analysis, all the feedback that we've gotten from all the FP&A financial professionals all throughout the world. All right, it focuses on leadership, functional skills, the business partnering and collaboration, the process, the data and analytics, and that last piece is why we're here today, right? It's all about the technology, moving you from those, I'll call it traditional Excel spreadsheets. I would have joked that I would have said Lotus. And that's pretty much where I started, right? So I've started with 13-column paper to Lotus, and I do miss it because I like the acronym of WYSIWYG. What you see is what you get. But that'll be the third joke I tell you. So as you can see, I try to keep this pretty light, right? Because that's why we're here. So let's go ahead and get started. So the traditional look and feel, what I talk about from a planning aspect is that traditional approach, right? And it's 7 buckets, right? It's anywhere from how long does it take to build a traditional annual operating plan? On average, it's 12 months, right? And occasionally you have some updates here and there that either you do it monthly or quarterly, or in some cases, I've worked for companies that do it semi-annually. What's the overall approach? Well, as you can see, traditional wise, everything is in a silo, right? The strategic aspect is done on the back of a paper napkin, an envelope, sitting down with my boss or my boss's boss, but there was no tie back to that overall financial model where you built it from the bottom up. And that last piece, it never tied to anything that was operational related, right? So what are the sales folks doing? Do we have enough inventory production wise? What are our new services aspect? Do we have enough people to actually manage or service the business if business booms? Third piece, right? We talk about the content. Are these political? It can be very political in nature because they're pretty much pre-negotiated budgets, right? You have to be at X from a departmental expense perspective. And what's the overall investment, either from a capital planning or what's that 3-5 year outlook? And how does that tie back if I start to do it from a bottom-up approach? But the method, right? It's a modeling driven by strategic objectives based on historical actions, because that's really all we have to go on. But imagine now if you can bring in both those external as well as new internal drivers that drives your business forward. The last 3, it's all about the tools. What are the tools that typically accountants or finance folks like to play with? Well, typically it's Excel. And through my many years of experience, right? You're going to have to pry that from my dead cold hands is pretty much what most accountants or finance folks tell me, because that's what they love. But I've done it both sides, right? From that manual experience to let's put in a consolidation system to either consolidate the data or aggregate the data. The last piece, or the last two pieces, we talk about the duration of how long should it take versus how long should it really take. Now they have listed here, it's typically 1 to 3 months on average. So I have gone through experiences where it takes up to 6 months to build an annual operating plan. And by the end of those 6 months, that information is already old and outdated. So what am I playing with? What's the benchmark? It's old information. And lastly is what is the output, right? Typically, it's a single financial plan that ultimately gets produced, that ultimately gets signed off by your board of directors, your head of the company. And there's a variety of maybe 5 or 6 key KPIs that we're managing the business by. We all know today's world, right? You need multiple scenarios, multiple KPIs to manage that business from the top to the bottom and from the bottom to the top. So again, that's just a traditional, what I typically have seen. But as you can see, that the new wave or the new world is what will revolve more around that scenario management aspect, right? Rolling plans, updating this information, moving it from that 12 to maybe that 15, 18-month mark, but it's a rolling forecast where you're looking at the next 3 months in a little bit more detail-oriented fashion. And moving it from separate to a single integrated platform that focuses and ties everything together, right? Strategic, financial, and that last component is so important. It's the operational piece. And the content, right? Moving more towards that driver-based planning. As we walk through today's presentation, what you're going to find, or what you probably already know, is most companies, it's just a handful of drivers that they're using, but there's so many more factors out there today that you need to incorporate much, much more in order to be much more successful. The last couple pieces we talk about, it's the modeling, right? It's driven not only by internal or just a set of few KPIs or metrics. You need to invoke both the internal as well as external events that are impacting your business, right? Case in point, COVID, right? Pretty much closed down the world, regardless of what country you're sitting in. Supply chains were ruined. Things were just turned upside down in a short couple of months. And now it's taking even longer to dig our way out of it. The tools, right? I talked about the manual process, but imagine now if you can start to automate and use more advanced analytical systems. Now, I've sat in the office of finance, and typically the tools that my boss said you can play with are Excel, and we'll give you as many bodies to do it as humanly possible. But we know that humans make mistakes. They fat finger a digit from here to there. I know, because I'm guilty of doing it. But the beauty here is with Board and many other vendors that you're going to see or play with in the market is the ability to automate the information, store it, and get those tools that I call, it's anywhere from the BI, the business intelligence, to predictive analytic tools, or the artificial intelligence. Need to start incorporating those types of financial tools, or not only financial tools, but just tools analytic in nature that can now analyze a boatload of information to isolate the individual trends that are affecting your business, not only today, but into the future. Time-wise, right? The ability to speed it up. That's what we're all talking about, because we need information faster to make those all-important business decisions. And the last piece really is the output, moving it from a single to a multiple scenario, in the fact that it's just not best case, worst case, defensive case. You need multiple scenarios to plan for, multiple things that are going to affect your business. Okay. So again, that's just me high level talking about from a traditional aspect of where we are to where we need to be. Just need to move one thing out of my way. All right. So let me take you on the journey of what the FP&A maturity has seen, or what I've seen throughout. And a lot of this applies to not only my experience over the last 30 years, but I believe a lot of what you're experiencing today, first and foremost. So 5 different levels, right? It's anywhere from that basic understanding of what are we playing with today. And it's really, it could be that simple Excel spreadsheet that sits in the hands of that individual that sits in FP&A, and he's having a sidebar conversation with his boss or his boss's boss. It's as simple as that. There's no technology in place. Very few analytics are involved here, very few KPIs. There's not a whole lot of thought, but that basic approach is really political in nature. It's really my boss's boss telling us where the goal needs to be. How you get there, entirely up to you. The second piece is how we want to start to develop those traditional basic plans, add a few more tools into the toolbox, so to speak, right? Take you from that basic analytic reporting driver aspect to I now need some planning models and some tools to go with it that are more than 13 column paper, I joke, to that Lotus Excel aspect, right? But need to now put it more into a defined outlook. Step number 3, it's now to have more eyes on the goal of where you're going to be long-term, as opposed to that short-term outlook. Give you more analytical mindsights, more analysts, more folks from a variety of different business parts within your organization. It's more of that partnership all along, defining the process, automating the data where you can, and we'll get into the data aspect of it throughout today's survey, or today's presentation, I should say, and make it more driver-based in nature. But those drivers need to not only be internal, but external as well. And that trying to either get away from that heavy reliance on IT, because in finance's world, right, it's a small team, so it's do more with less. But the ultimate goal, right, is to get more to steps 4 and 5 from an advanced leading perspective, right? Leadership embraces change and makes long-term decisions with that strategic vision in mind, right? Make FP&A a true player at the table to help you make those sound business decisions, because, right, we're the gatekeeper of all the information, regardless of where it comes from, but somehow we know how to aggregate, consolidate those key components of your business and basically put pen to paper. Simple as that. But that last piece, that leading, this is ultimately where everybody wants to get to. How they get to that stage on their journey, it's not easy. It's going to be a struggle. There's a few factors that come into play when we ultimately get there. But number 5, leading, that's ultimately, at the end of the day, that's the end of the rainbow, so to speak. Yeah. So let's just talk about the leading state. That's really where I want to focus the bulk of my attention today, is take you from that basic aspect of where we were and now build the bridge to get you to what's going to take to get to that leading state. So there's 6 categories we talked about up front, right? It's the leadership, the functional skills, the collaboration, the process, the analytics, and last piece is the technology component. So from a leadership perspective, it's really that buy-in. It starts from the top all the way through the organization. So if you have solid leadership that says, hey, we need to start to plan or align the company based on, let's do an actual business plan, whether it's that first 12 months or that 3 to 5 year strategic plan, but make sure that we promote it all the way through, because change is good. And I'll talk about a little bit later on some of my experience with maybe some of the companies I've worked for when we talk about change, and change comes in many flavors. But that last piece around leadership, it's really talking about the analytics from a base decision-making process. But the functional skills are key, right? We're talking about a foundation of how you get to that leading state, and there's 6 categories. The functional aspect, right? I need a team that's highly disciplined from an approach standpoint. I need folks that can analyze the data, make sure that my data is clean, right? I've demonstrated products in the EPM world to thousands of companies. And if I had a nickel or a dollar for every time somebody says, yeah, our data is dirty, I was like, I'm not surprised. I am not shocked, because just the consolidation of information within any organization, regardless of where it comes from, whether it comes from your ERP, whether it comes from an HCM or a CRM system, or in sometimes just homegrown systems that are just truly outdated because our business has outgrown it and we've exceeded those limitations. But the last functional skill in there, it's really about the training. It's the investment that the organization wants to take in the individuals to grow the business. Step number 3, very important to me, is really from a collaboration standpoint. All right, you have all the information. What do you do with it? Well, obviously the folks in finance or accounting, those are the trusted advisors of all the information from a data perspective, right? Are our numbers even right? If you don't have that as the starting point, you're gonna have to start over, right? Redo the ship or rebuild the foundation. But it's all about telling how you're going to tell that story, right? Is information that you put out into the market, is it negative, but you want to spin it in such a positive light that we have a plan of action of how we can reduce that or increase it or make it better. But it's all about building a team and making that team be accountable. Now, to the right, we talk about the process, the analytics, and the technology. Every organization, it's like building a house, right? You're going to start with the foundation. You're going to start to build some rooms, redesign it, build it, and then redo it again and again and again until that process is running like a fine oiled machine. And that first bullet truly is my goal in most organizations I've worked for, right? It's all about the strategic, the business, and the operational plans. And all three need to be fully in line, fully in sync, not meaning three separate pieces of information that I sat down and did on the back of an envelope, but I can't tie it to a business plan that goes from the top to the bottom. Oh yeah, by the way, I didn't include manufacturing, production, or demand because I don't really want to know what they want to do. In that process, you need to be fully aligned. And it's a cycle, right? From a life cycle perspective, you're going to grow, you're going to have some challenges, some pain points, but you will overcome it eventually. As we start to talk about the data and the analytics aspect, right? Everybody wants, and I've heard this multiple times, is your data real time? Real time? Sure. It's as real time or close to real time as humanly possible. As the transaction gets booked in your ERP, I want to be able to pull that across into my FP&A model. Well, there are links, there are tools, there are bridges that even within board, we can build that logic as the minute information changes in one place, it's updated somewhere else, and it's available to a variety of different individuals that they can now use that as part of their workflow process to better understand information changes, whether it's the metadata as we add new products, we add new companies, we add new accounts, everybody's fully aligned. The next couple pieces here, right? It's all about the drivers, the analytical drivers that are either internal or external. But now we want to bring in a new group of analytics, right? These are new words to most accountants or finance folks, probably not in the last 5 or 10, but to the older group, yeah, predictive, prescriptive analytics, artificial intelligence, machine learning, based on those individual trends of how we're doing things. It's not looking at just how many products did we sell. It's like, well, who are we selling those products to? Who's buying it? What's the price margin based on that? Things of that nature. What's the traffic coming through our stores? What are the external factors that are affecting our business? These are the type of analytics that you now need to incorporate into those models versus the traditional approach that we talked about. The variety of different scenarios. This is important, right? Best case, worst case, right? As I mentioned before, COVID hits, global warming or climate warming too is now affecting many organizations as well as many countries as how they start to plan on an ongoing basis. But that last bullet, and dovetail into the next one, is it's a three-way model, right? Not only do I want to include the strategic, the business, and the operational, but I want to be able to create that P&L, that balance sheet, and that cash flow. Those three things have to be fully integrated from a data perspective. And the last component we talk about, it's all about the technology, right? It's I need a solution or I need a tool or I need a product that can fully integrate all of my data sets, both financial as well as operational information, to store in one place from a version control perspective that now makes it flexible, easy to use for any user in my organization, from the top to the bottom, that now makes it the ability to do self-service reporting. I hear this time and time again that we need to make sure that our end user community, our business users, can access the data quickly and easily without having to write any code or going back to IT to ask for another report. They want to be able to point and click, drag and drop. It's as simple as that. But any models you start to build, right, to bridge the gap from a driver base to a business intelligence bridge, the technology needs to be there. You need to easily automate the approach from a data perspective. That goes back to the integration aspect. And it's real-time collaboration, right? Making sure that all folks are fully understanding throughout your organization of who's doing what and when they're doing it. And that last piece, it's really, I need to be able to digitize, right? I need to get into the Move from Excel spreadsheets, where it's very siloed in nature, where it's very two-dimensional, rows and columns, to more of that on-demand planning as information changes, whether it's on the minute, the hour, the month, the quarter, or even just annually. You have the ability to make those changes quickly and easily and get the information or disseminate the information into the right hands at the right time. So let's quickly just talk about some of the results based on the survey that we got back. So I think a lot of this, you're not going to be surprised. When I looked at this, I was like, wow, really? It's almost like time has not changed over the last 30 years. So you're starting to see small inroads into this, but change is good. It just takes a long time to get there. So overall assessment is what we found is really just in that leading category. Only 2% of the overall organizations are actually doing that today. There's more than 75% of everybody else goes from the basic to the defined to the developing. They're still sort of trying to figure out what they want to be when they grow up. They either don't have the right leadership, the right resources, or the money that's available to invest within their own organization to grow the culture and grow the data aspect of where you need to be long term. A lot of these companies that fall in that 75% bucket really still thinking small versus what do I need to do invest wise to get it to a larger aspect, get it into the hands of more individuals all throughout the organization. Now, a couple of those bullets that we talked about from tracking those organizations, the one that came up the most was driver-based planning. And we found, surprisingly enough, that 50% of organizations are doing that. Well, what are the other 50 still doing, right? So they're a little bit behind the times, but there's plenty of room for change in this aspect. So you can see at the top, right, 6% still, they're not using any drivers. It's really back of the envelope, paper napkin kind of aspect, and is really political in nature. I need my revenue, my bottom line to be X at the end of the day. So whether I'm playing or working for a privately held company or a publicly traded company, you'll still find that it's very political in nature from a numbers perspective, right? Second piece in there is, 50% are using some types of drivers, and these could be just 5 or 6 different KPIs, but that's where it ends, right? Imagine running your business off of, we only have 5 or 6 drivers that really control the business. In some organizations, that might be the case. In much more complex organizations, definitely not the case. Bullets 3 and 4, right? 27% are starting to use that fully driver-based, but it's not a connected or integrated plan, meaning the P&L, the balance sheet, the cash flow. This is where you ultimately want to get to from a driver-based planning that's incorporating internal as well as external drivers that were ultimately going to affect that 3-way driver-based modeling component. So that third or second category we talk about, really, it's incorporating what we call the new tools to the trade. So when I first came out of college, I don't think I ever even heard the term predictive analytics. Well, because half the time I didn't even have an email when I came out of college. I sometimes date myself, right? My kids will joke at me that I lived my life through a spreadsheet. It's partially true and partially guilty. But the idea of understanding predictive analytics, right? Artificial intelligence, machine learning, right? 20 years ago, those concepts were relatively new. Now they're full blown, their existence. If you're not using it, you're missing the bigger picture, right? So as you can see, as we go through this chart, right, 38% of all organizations that we've surveyed, they have no plans for any of this to incorporate that in their business. That could be, I'm missing 38% of my overall plan because I didn't want to invest in technology. Majority of companies, or another third of them, are saying, yep, I'm going to plan to do this in maybe 2 years. Well, that's 2 years too late. 18%, we're getting closer to the goal, right? 6 months. But of all the organizations we surveyed, right, 500,000 companies, only a 10% margin of them, or 10% of the overall pool, are starting to incorporate predictive analytics, the machine learning, the business intelligence, the artificial intelligence into their overall FP&A model. So where are organizations tracking as far as culture and data, right? So I've lived this experience. I used to work for a water utility back in the day, and I'll walk you through some of these points, but I think they're pretty relevant. So 20 years ago, I worked for an organization. They were a company, large multinational utility power company, based in Germany, was buying other components throughout the world. They decided to buy something in the US because they had already bought something in the UK. I wound up working for the UK version of this prior to working for the US, right? Once the acquisition went through. But the idea here is it was a culture clash. So I had the US that did not like change. I worked for the Brits or the UK folks. They just hit the ground and kept going. The German aspect of the business was they treat it like a scientific experiment. They wanted to understand and break it down from the bottom all the way to the top. And just for fun, from a cultural experience, there was a component that we sat in Chile that we would basically just acquire operating units and work with the government down there. So when I talk culture clash, right? US, UK, Germany, and Chile. All right. 4 different worlds, 4 different unique cultures of how they look at information and how you're supposed to break down cultural barriers to organize those companies to make things go or align everybody on the same page. Very difficult in nature. But the idea here from a cultural data perspective, right? It's the challenge of breaking down those barriers. Remember, US, UK, Germany, as well as Chile, just for fun, right? And often that culture is, analytical, not analytical, and perpetuates dysfunctional and efficient processes all throughout the organization because everybody looks at their business a completely different way, or from a cultural standpoint of where they sit, they don't know any better. It's really just, this is the way we've done it, and we don't know another way to do it. And that last component, it's so true, right? As 10% of most organizations we've surveyed, right? They don't have the ability to look at data and analytics from a strategic standpoint. They don't really understand what their data hierarchies are, right? I've done this for 20, almost 30 years, more or less. I've done it from a demonstration perspective, walking into an organization, and 9 times out of 10, they say, yep, our data is dirty. We don't understand our architectural structures. We basically just add things willy-nilly without any checks or balances. But obviously those leading organizations, now they're starting to fine tune, they're starting to transform how they need to do things in order to survive, okay? So let's talk about how we move FP&A to the next level, right? Get you to that leading stage. There's 9 steps in how we're gonna get there, right? We're gonna start at the bottom. I'm gonna talk about these 3 at a time. The way I've decided to group it is that we talk about it from a leadership and cultural aspect, understand the data quality, throw in the collaboration component, talk about key drivers. Key drivers can be both internal as well as external. Understanding that driver-based model, right? P&L, balance sheet, as well as cash flow, and now mix in the analytics from an artificial intelligence / machine learning perspective. It's not just about the numbers, it's about, all right, we sell a product, but who's buying the product? What's the price component associated with that product, right? Understanding if you're a retail organization, traffic-wise, weather patterns, what's affecting what one day versus the next, and how can we learn from that? Do we open up earlier or later? Close earlier or later? And then we want to start to implement a fully integrated system, bringing data from all walks of life into one, well, you'll hear the term data repository, whether it's a data warehouse, a data lake, and pretty soon I'm sure they're going to come up with a 3rd data component. We have a chance to name that one. All right. But then once all the data is fully aligned, we know where it all comes from, the ability to start automating the routine. Is it we're going to do this every hour, do this every day, every week, every month, things of that nature. And the last 2 components, all important, right? You cannot only just be a single scenario management team or organization. We need to rely on best case, worst case, if things go in a certain direction. And that last piece, in giving information to the leaders of your teams or your organization at any level within the organization to make decisions based on the information that they have in hand to make sure, is it right? Is it wrong? And can we rely on it? And can we make the decisions based on that information? So let's start to walk through each of the 9 steps. So the first three, we talked a little bit earlier about the leadership and culture. This is first and foremost what I always found important in some of the companies I've worked for. This will either make your organization succeed, or in some cases, really it's going to fail. And then you're open for acquisition, or they simply just close the doors and you go out of business. But the idea here behind the leadership and culture of what do we want to be when we grow up? We want to be able to engage champions within each area of the business, have a leader within those individual groups, and then we can start to disseminate that cultural aspect down into those individual groups all throughout your organization. It's the ability to start to promote change. We talk about this, now it's just a matter of we need to do it. As well as that last component we talked about is to foster the analytical approach to enable decision-making processes at every level or every facet within the company or organization. The second component of this, I talked a lot about it earlier, is it's the data quality. Is my data right, wrong, different, right? But I need to be able to understand the quality of the information and how we're transforming it from one place to another, how we can interpret it, understand and map out that data architecture, right? It's the foundation of any application or any solution you start to build, start to utilize, start to implement. It's all about the transformation of what your data will ultimately look like. Third component, right? Need to work as a team. We need collaboration all throughout the organization for every different department to understand what drives the business forward. In order to move that business forward, we need technology. We need a better platform. Yes, Excel was a great tool at some point, but it truly is not meant to be a database. It's siloed in nature and it's two-dimensional. You need to think long-term or big picture is multi-dimensional, understanding each buy of your business, right? I want to look at it by company, by country, by location, by product, by service line, things of that nature. The next three components along that path to FP&A success, or FP&A gold standard, I'll call it, right, is the key drivers, it's the driver-based planning, and it's that last component, right? I need to be able to integrate all throughout my organization from the strategic to the business to the operations. First component, right? Talk about the drivers of what drives your business, both internally as well as externally. They don't have to just be financial drivers of your business. They can be any metric throughout your organization, from the financial to the operational. But now we need to be able to connect that organization at every level, understanding the goals. Did we meet or exceed it? And if we didn't, or if we did, there's an explanation that goes along with it. And then that information can be disseminated up or down. Driver-based plans, the ability to now implement those key business drivers into multiple facets in your business plan, whether you do it for the next 3 weeks, the next 3 months, or the next 3 years, the ability to incorporate those drivers all throughout. And now as we start to rely on technology, right? It's the AI, it's machine learning components, the ability to now shorten those planning cycles of going from the traditional, yes, let's start around July to kick off the strategic plan, move into August/September for the first cut, first pass of rolling information out to the end user community, and then getting that draft version back and starting to tweak the numbers to get to the right driver, right expectation, or right goal of where we need that plan or forecast to be. But that last component, right? The ability to now not only just make it a P&L exercise, and I hear this a lot, is now to incorporate that through your balance sheet, through your cash flow. And those last two components typically are formulaic in nature, but you need them to at least be there. And what level of granularity do you want to move to when we talk about cash flow? I want to focus more around the working capital components, right? Understanding the accounts receivable, the accounts payable, as well as the inventory. Those three are important components in any organization. Are we collecting our cash faster? Are we paying our bills too quickly? And do we have enough inventory on hand from a supply demand perspective? The last component there, we talked about integrated business plans, the ability to now link that strategic goal to your bottom up or top down or middle out combination thereof but to also include the operational aspects of that overall plan. And then it's not only just one way to look at it. We need to explore both the horizontal, the vertical, as well as that cross-organizational integration throughout the company today. The last three, I'll call them success metrics to get there, or categories, right? The ability to automate that routine, to provide additional scenario planning, and ultimately make those decisions based on the information through 1 through 8 steps. Let's talk about it. So the ability to automate the routine, right? Deploy a planning platform, move it from Excel into a database. That database can be made up of multiple cubes, and I tend to joke from time to time, a cube can be a dirty word to an accountant. It's just, think about it in your world, it's a place to store all your information, both financial and non-financial, and utilize that information consistently all across the platform. The ability now to move from those manual tasks that are typically carried out by your FP&A teams to start to automate those processes. Put a workflow process in place to understanding at any moment's time, you can understand who's doing what and when they're doing it, and who can do what at any point in time. But you also want to empower the end user community or any user in your organization. I hear this a lot, right? When they look at a product or they look at a new solution, is it going to be easy to use? 9 times or most of the time, it's like, yeah, it looks good. But the end user community still relies heavily on, I still like doing it the way I used to do it in Excel. Can I just stay there because I like the model? I like the copy and paste aspect of it. But really, in any modern solution you're going to go with, the ability for users to look at a chart, look at a graph, and be able to drill down into it. So within the board platform, specifically, you have the ability to drill down, drill through, drill across, and drill back to transactional level detail if you so desire. But it's any data source. But most finance folks, we start with that ERP system because that's where our financials are stored from an actuals perspective. So that's the information we start to build on. But imagine now if you can drill back into an HCM system, a CRM system, your data warehouse, your data lake, to capture each component of your business and use that to start to automate your plans going forward. The second component here, scenario planning, right? I told you this before, right? The ability to move from that single version of the truth or what the future thinks it needs to be, that annual operating plan that we did it for the, next 12 months. But by the time we're finished, a lot of that information is already 6 to 12 months old. So now the information from a scenario planning perspective needs to be real time. Need to have active drivers, both internal as well as external. But also we need multiple views of the business, right? It's best case, worst case, high, medium, and low. Futuristic turns to include things from a strategic initiative perspective. Do I want to include it? Are we opening up a new plant, a new office, introducing a new product or a service within the business model that we didn't have yesterday? Or if we're not going to grow organically, are we going to go through acquisition? If we incorporate that acquisition, what's the timeline? How are we going to transform their world into our world so we can aggregate or consolidate that information and look at it consistently? The ultimate goal here, right? It's getting down to that decision-making process, the ability to link that three-way model from your strategic to your business to your operational plan, but consistently have that thing going all the time. Because even though you do that one-off planning process today, it's an ongoing process. Information changes every single day. The world changes every single day. So your model just can't be stagnant. It needs to be flexible and automate the process going forward. And that last component, really, we touched on this earlier, is the ability to explore it in multiple different fashions, both horizontally, vertically, and all across your organization from an integration standpoint. And lastly, as we start to wrap this up and we'll move towards some questions, is the aspect is there's a this is the full-blown actual paper that was written. There's a link at the bottom that'll take you to a free copy from a research perspective. But at this point, I'm going to hand this back to Taryn to open it up for questions. And then from there, feel free to reach out to me. I believe my information will be shared or copied somewhere within this group. Again, I'm really here more from a trusted advisor perspective standpoint, that I've done this for a little over 30 years. And I've done it anywhere from, yes, 13 column paper to Lotus to Excel. And I grew up and became a big boy because now I can play with automated solutions on a analytical platform. Okay, so I appreciate the time and looking forward to some of the questions that the group has to offer as well. So Taryn, let me pass it back to you.
Excellent. Thanks for that, Michael. So yeah, we're going to open up the floor to a Q&A period. So if anyone has any questions for Michael, feel free to either pop them in the chat. I'll be moderating the Q&A period, or alternatively, if you'd like to raise your hand, we'd like to hopefully be able to organize this portion of the session and be able to take questions in the orders that they're received. So again, either the chat, or if you want to raise your hand, we'll keep an eye on that. But Michael, I do actually have a couple of questions that came throughout your presentation. So maybe we can get started with those to get the ball rolling. So the first one being, this all sounds great, but at the moment, I'd be happy just not to be drowning in spreadsheets. Where do I start?
So obviously, I show up at the door when people are to this stage of the game. They said, I've done the world of Excel. It's fun. As I mentioned before, right, it's two-dimensional. But the idea, the first step within, if you're trying to move to an application like Board, is understanding the foundation, understanding not only the short-term goals, but the long-term goals of where a solution like Board can move all of your data within a data repository, but also now give the end users the same flexibility that they used to do in Excel, and there are still add-ins that we can utilize in products like Board, is to put you in a better position to verify that all the data no longer plays in Excel spreadsheets where individual users insert rows, delete columns, overwrite your calculated formulas. That alleviates probably at least 75% of what a typical FP&A manager or FP&A director spends most of their time on, is verifying that the data they received after they gather and collect it is to be able to tick and tie, right? So it's tick and tie is part of my DNA. I need to verify that all the information is correct in some fashion. But the ability here is to move you from that Excel world to more of that automated data repository that now we can all now pull your data in and look at your actual history and use that history or historical actuals or historical information along financials or operational data and move it towards to the ability to plan and forecast, but not only at a top level, but also at a much more granular dimensionality basis as well. So start to include things like markets or channels or products or services, things that drive your business, but sometimes you just don't have access to that level of granularity. But within solutions like Board, you now can. And it opens up the future of trying to move your world from that basic to that long-term goal of, I want to be a leader. Okay.
Great.
Thanks for the question. Yep.
Great. Thank you for the question and for that answer. The next one is I believe more of a comment, but maybe you can speak to it. So this individual mentioned a big problem we have is version control and people overwriting other people's forecast numbers or the right people making the changes, but we've still got to figure out what they changed. It's looking like a needle in a haystack.
Yeah. Thank you for that question. Again, I've experienced this, I've lived this, and I've heard it multiple times, lots of times, from any prospect or customer that I've ever worked with, right? Version control is, how do I know that my data is actually accurate? Who changed what, when they did it? This is all about putting in a workflow management system within any FP&A tool, or even as part of your closed process, right? There's a checklist that either I kept in my head or I actually put pen to paper and had a little Excel spreadsheet that tracked who's doing what and when they're doing it. These are the dates and times, and this is who approved it. In solutions like Board, this is where you can start to automate that workflow process and put alerts, put traffic lighting, disseminate reports quickly and easily, as opposed to reproducing the wheel or reproducing and ticking and tying and gathering and collecting all that information to make that information look and feel in a certain way. Within solutions like Board, you can create those dashboards that have alerts that already have predefined, hey, here's the question that I want to ask, And now you can start to have that interactive communication or interaction with each of those individuals real time, as opposed to, yeah, send me an email, shoot me a text, call me on the phone, leave me a voicemail, get back to it when I'm not busy. Welcome to our world. So all the information needs to be real time. But from a version control perspective is, all right, I may have multiple scenarios, but I have one version of the truth. Which one are we going to promote to the top? And like solutions like Board, as I mentioned before, from a solution perspective, Board can provide all that and so much more. Okay, but excellent question. Thank you for the comment.
Excellent. Thanks, Michael. So we have another question in the chat, and thank you to everyone who sent questions so far. Feel free to keep sending them through the chat, or alternatively, for anyone who may have missed it, feel free to raise your hand if you'd like to personally ask Michael your question as well. But to keep the ball rolling as part of, this Q&A period, the next question we've got in the chat is, will you share the presentation? So for anyone who's interested in receiving a copy, is there a way for them to reach out to you directly, or to grab your contact details to arrange to have a copy sent over to them?
Yeah, so part of this presentation is, I believe there will be a link made available of the actual physical presentation. As you can see on the screen, there's a link to the actual copy of the white paper, I'll call it. And lastly, my contact information really is just mleese@board.com. That's probably the easiest way to contact me directly. And feel free to, again, act as a trusted advisor. If Board is the ultimate solution for you, I'll work with you. If it's not, I'll point you in the right direction as well.
Excellent. And with your permission, Michael, I'm actually going to pop into the chat for everyone to see. I'm going to put mleese@board.com for your contact details. So anyone who's interested can feel free to reach out to Michael directly. And I guess as a follow-up question that I see here in the chat that's related, if anyone was interested in reaching out to you outside of arranging to get a copy of the presentation, could anyone potentially arrange to receive a demo through you, or would it be best for them to go through your website? What would be the appropriate channel?
You can reach out to me direct. I'll point you in the right direction. We'll gather some information, but yeah, you can start with me as your starting point. I believe you can even go on board.com. I believe there's a window there where you can view any of the demos or go online to set up an appointment with one of our sales executives. Again, it's sort of that chain of command. But if you feel comfortable, you can reach out to me easily direct. I'll respond. As well, you can always contact me on LinkedIn as well. So there's a profile. Again, social media aspect. There's my plug for me. That's it. But yeah.
Perfect. Perfect. So for everyone, again, Michael's contact details are in the chat, mleese@board.com. Feel free to reach out to him directly. Looking through, I believe that's all the questions that we have in the chat. Are there any final questions that anyone has for Michael before we wrap up the session? Again, feel free to pop any last minute questions or comments into the chat. I'll be sure to catch wind of them. Or alternatively, if you'd like to raise your hand and again, have the opportunity to ask Michael directly or personally, that's an option as well. So we'll leave that for a couple minutes. Michael, I don't know if you have any sort of concluding remarks, comments, thoughts you'd like to leave with the group while we give them a last minute opportunity to come up with any questions.
Sure, I'll just reemphasize it. So I've done this a long time. First and foremost, let me just thank Taryn for putting this together, and thank you guys for attending. But really, I'm here as a trusted advisor to help you, point you in the right direction of how we can help you transform your organization from the most basic to leading or cutting edge. But ultimately, it's helping your organization succeed from an information perspective, putting you on the path to success. But as you mentioned, I've really enjoyed the time. I've really enjoyed presenting, not only based on my experience, but really what the survey came back with, and sort of helping move those metrics or those percentages to the next bucket in line, so to speak, move it up the gold chain to the end of the rainbow, so to speak. So I appreciate the time. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Taryn.
Wonderful. Thank you, Michael, for an excellent session. Thank you, everyone, for attending. We hope that you enjoyed it. I know I certainly did. And we're so grateful to our valued members, Board International, for putting this together for us. So if anyone has any questions that come to mind after the session, you do have Michael's contact details to feel free to reach out to him directly or to us. We'd be happy to facilitate that. And to everyone who joined, please keep an eye out to our events calendar on our website. We'd love to see you join us for one of our future TRBOT events. So thanks again, everyone. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, board, and have a wonderful day.